Tag, you're it. I'm Amanda Malcolm, and you're listening to You're It Girl, a podcast focused on you and what propels you. Because that past, it does not define you. Your time is now, and you're it, girl. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to You're It Girl. It might not actually be morning when you're watching this, but it's morning for me right now. I was just talking to my producer, Nick Tantillo. Just want to give him a shout out with Tantillo Productions here at Inspired Media. Thank you for meeting me at 7 a.m. We're a little bit behind on episodes. You guys don't notice that because we launched new episodes. We kind of batch record and then we launch. But really, it's been about 6 weeks since we have recorded. And so we are here bright and early this morning. So thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. And if you have something that you would like to share, please reach out to me on either TikTok or on the You're It Girl Instagram. It's just at You're It Girl, obviously. Or you can also email me at iamit@youreitgirl.com. So it has been a wild 6 weeks. I just actually came out of a relationship. I've not been in an exclusive relationship in a little bit over, it's been like a year and 9 months. It was absolutely 1,000% intentional. Now, I'm not going to talk about that relationship yet, mostly because it sort of kind of has shaken me and like rocked me to my core, and I'm still processing it. So we are not going to talk about it on this episode. And also, I don't really want to freak anybody out, any potential suitors that they could possibly end up on my podcast and because of future dating. So we're gonna put that to the side for a second. And the interesting thing about this relationship is that it has been the shortest relationship as far as time goes, but the most intimate relationship that I've been in my life. I know it's crazy because, as you all know, I was married. I was married for 7 years with that person for 13 years. And then I also had another relationship for 2.5 years. And you would think that those relationships would have been relationships that were deeply intimate. But from my perspective, they were actually quite surface. I had not fully ever in either of those relationships, my marriage or my long-term relationship afterwards, shared my actual needs that deeply, or it took me a long time in the relationship to really express any needs that I actually had. And so because of the depth of the intimacy in this relationship that I just left and the timing of this podcast, it was all around the same time, combined with severing the relationship with my mom, which a lot of you know if you have been listening and you listened to those voicemails. My mom and I have not spoken in months since about 3 weeks after the podcast launched. And I can't talk about all this yet, at least not live on here. I am, of course, talking about it with friends, my trusted advisors, my besties, of course, because talking about these things is therapeutic, right? It helps. You don't want to, if you're going through anything like this, you don't want to bottle up these feelings. It's certainly not healthy. We all know this. Talking about them, whether it be to a friend or a trusted advisor or therapist, is good. You don't want to keep these things in and not process them. But what we are going to talk about today is needs. Have you ever thought about what your needs actually are in a relationship? Could you name them right now if you're driving or listening at the gym? Could you name what your needs are in a relationship? Have you ever communicated them in a coherent type of way or to someone else or written them down for yourself? Do you really know what they actually are? The reason why I ask is because when faced with this question, many of us don't know how to answer. I didn't until a couple of months ago. And when faced with the question from the person I was dating, I completely freaked out, panicked. For the first time ever, I actually communicated in the moment how uncomfortable I was with the conversation. We were driving in the car and this person asked what my needs were in a relationship. And I suddenly became silent and looked out the window and realized that I had been triggered by past trauma because I could not I did not feel safe enough to be able to communicate these things. So in that moment, I expressed that. I said, hey, this conversation is really uncomfortable for me to have. It's not something that I feel comfortable and confident with communicating. And it made me really think in that moment why that is. Why is something that should be so basic of communicating your basic needs to someone so incredibly uncomfortable? And so I did a deep dive into this. I obviously have talked about these things many times in the past with my therapist, but being single for a year and 9 months, I had realized that coming out of a marriage and coming out of a serious relationship and then being single for a good amount of time and then going into a relationship, I had realized that being single kept me in a place where I did not have to deal with any of these things. There was nothing that would happen to trigger some sort of traumatic response that I would have to work through. Because when you're single, you're not being triggered by past childhood trauma and past relationship trauma because you're not dealing with any of these things on a day-to-day basis. And so, you see, if you grew up with certain types of childhood trauma, expressing feelings and emotions is a no-go, especially for adult children of alcoholics and addicts, because we have huge, huge issues expressing even the tiniest emotion. Why? Why is this? Because we spent years bottling up our emotions and learning to suppress them so that we would not provoke our parents' rage. Even sometimes a simple question like asking for a ride to school could ignite and trigger such anger in our parent that would lead to cussing, swearing, pulling our hair, slamming doors, screaming, and maybe even perhaps getting the silent treatment for days for asking a simple little question. Some of my siblings later on, as I became older, and I was involved in a lot of activities when I was young, but as my mom's alcoholism got worse, many of my siblings were not involved in any activities at all. And a lot of this was because they didn't want to ask for fear of provoking such rage with a simple, tiny little thing. And so basically, we were taught for years, our entire childhood, to numb our feelings and to have no needs, not to have or express any emotion. And so as a result, into our adulthood, it's very difficult for us to express any need or emotion in any adult relationship, even sometimes in friendships. And my friends know this extremely well when it comes to me. They know if I'm actually, bless their hearts, because they know me so well that they know if there's a certain situation in which I need something or I'm sick or I'm sad, they won't wait for me to ask because they know that it's actually probably there's probably a pretty good chance that I won't actually ask. And so bless their hearts, they've sort of learned to accommodate me in that way because they know I have such difficulty doing that. And I'm each day in each situation, I'm trying to really focus on that so that way I can actually describe what my needs are, especially to people that I feel safe around. The interesting thing about this, about expressing needs and emotions, is that it's so deeply ingrained and learned in our behavior that sometimes we can't even name the emotion. When I first started going to therapy, my therapist actually had a list of words that she would give to me. So when we'd be talking about a topic, she would ask me how I felt or how that made me feel. And any complex emotion, I would not be able to label. And if you have a past that is similar to mine or has any sort of trauma, you may have experienced this as well, unless it's a simple emotion like sad, mad, glad. Yes, 3 to 4 letter words. If it's anything that's complex, it's very difficult to be able to actually identify the word with the emotion. And so my therapist would give me this list, and I would scan it and run down the list until the word that I found would make me feel emotional, where I would get some sort of emotion that came from that word. And then I knew that it would be the actual right word. And so we worked on this for a year so I could understand the more complex emotions that I felt, like resentment, betrayal, unworthiness, all of these things. And while I'm better at this now, it still is difficult. Sometimes I'll vent to a friend and they'll listen, and after minutes of conversation, they will actually give me the word that I've desperately been searching for, because they can sense out of frustration that I can't seem to identify what I feel. And the important piece of this is when we can actually identify the word and label that word with the feeling, then we can actually understand it. We can walk through it. We can work through it. We can overcome it. But if you can't find the word, you're sort of stuck in this anxious anxiety type of space. And so in relationships, as you can imagine, if you have experienced this or are experiencing this yourself, it's a challenge for many, many reasons. I'll tell you how it's been a challenge for me. Maybe this will relate somehow. I have exhausted myself in past relationships by always putting my partner first, always putting my partner's needs above my own. And this is also a very, very common trait for any adult child of an addict. We are constantly valuing others' needs as the only needs in a relationship. Now, initially, this makes you an amazing girlfriend or boyfriend. But every relationship that I've been in, the common theme is this. And this is something that people will actually say. You're so easy to be with. You're so accommodating. You're so chill. You never need anything. I always know that you're going to be okay. You don't need me. But here lies the problem. You're supposed to need things from your partner. A healthy relationship is one in which you are meeting one another's needs. But if you don't know what your needs are, you can't express them, and so they don't exist. And then the day will come when you're months or even years into a relationship, when you need something from your partner, and they're not capable of giving you what they need because they don't know how. And usually, as in the case of most people that I've dated or been with, is that they were emotionally unavailable to begin with, because that's how you attracted them with these set of characteristics to begin with. It's not even their fault. You never had a need for them to even practice. If you had, or if I had, I would have realized long before this moment, years into relationships, that that person probably would not have been capable. But instead, here we are again with our greatest fear coming true, which is another characteristic of an adult child of an alcoholic, that when we are in that moment where we actually do have a need and need our partner to be there for us, that instead of leaning in, they will retreat because of their emotional incapability. And then that feeling, that ultimate fear that we have of abandonment and unworthiness creeps in. And it is not a great cycle. The only way to break it is to actually understand and communicate what your needs are. And so that's what I was faced with. And this is the part of the story that I will share just to give a little bit of context to it. So I was dating this person and everything was going very well. There was a lot of chemistry. We had shared a lot of intimate things, and the depth of our relationship was really progressing quite quickly. It was not just surface. We were talking about future and things like that. And he was very adamant about me telling him what my needs were in a relationship. And so we are in the car and he asks me this. I say that I'm uncomfortable. And we continue the conversation as we are walking around to find a restaurant to go dine at. And after a lot of discomfort, I tell him that maybe it would be easier if I gave examples of things that make me feel safe or things that I need versus actually saying what the needs were. I said, would that work? He said, yes. He said, that would be something that would be helpful. I said, okay. So I give some examples and then I end up leaving and I come back home to Arizona and I think about it for a couple of days. I talked to my best friends about it and they shared with me that they said, Amanda, we've seen you in multiple relationships. And they said, you're getting much better at communicating, but this is really something that's going to be important for you as you start to explore, other relationships. If you really want to find a partner, you're going to have to learn to communicate your needs. Do you even know what they are? And so I sat down and I wrote them out. And after I wrote them out, I asked this person, I said, hey, I wanted to have a conversation and circle back to you about what we had talked about needs. I understand that it is important to you and I want to lean into the relationship and make sure that I tell you what they are. And so we had a phone conversation and we talked about them and I geared up for the conversation. And I shared he knew everything about my background, really. And I had shared again that obviously it was difficult for me to articulate my needs, that he obviously could tell from my discomfort in the car that it's not something that I'm comfortable doing. It's not that I don't want to do it. It's just that when that subject comes up, my body feels so dysregulated and anxious, and it wants to just completely shut down. Almost like it's almost in like crocodile brain survival mode. It's unable to express anything. And so one of the things I did share is I said that it was important for me in that relationship, for whoever I was with, to have patience with that, to know that it was something that I was working on, and that if I had strong feelings for someone, that although I was terrified to share what my needs were, that I was practicing it. And also to reiterate that, and if you are in this situation, that if you've experienced any sort of childhood trauma or trauma in relationships, that there's generally one thing in common when we have expressed our needs in the past. At least this is true for me. And this is true for relationship with my mom, relationship with my ex-husband, and relationship with my long-term boyfriend. When I get to the point where it's time to express actual needs, they're either neglected, ignored, diminished, devalued, or inconsequential to the needs of that other person. And I'm not just talking about emotional needs. I'm talking about physical needs, basic needs of safety and security, which a lot of you know about my mom, sexual exploitation, her sleeping, her having sex with somebody in a bed next to me. These are when I was in a space where I needed to have emotional support or feel safety from my mom, that was non-existent. I couldn't express it in that moment. This is the same for my relationship with my ex-husband after I had my daughter. He completely retreated and obviously relapsed. So he was unable to be there for me physically or emotionally. And then ex-boyfriend, fast forward to that relationship, I had a pretty extensive surgery and it was a similar experience. He was unable to provide any sort of safety or comfort or emotional support. We don't need to go into that whole story, but the point is that all of those things, that trauma runs so deep that there's a great fear behind communicating even the smallest need, because you're so afraid that if you do it, that person is going to retreat. Because whenever you've communicated it in the past with your parent or in any sort of serious relationships in which you should have felt the safest, the same action was reinforced. And instead of that person leaning in, they retreated. And they retreated to a pretty drastic degree. And so this is why communicating your needs, and in my case, communicating my needs, does not feel safe to do. And so I expressed to this person that they had in fact made me feel safe. And I knew it was important to communicate how fearful I was that communicating my needs would result in them retreating rather than leading in. And I knew how much that would hurt. But I also knew how important it was to practice this. Well, guess what happened? They did indeed retreat, which is incredibly hurtful. And again, my biggest fear is again reinforced. I don't know how this is going to affect me in the long run or how it's going to affect my future relationships, because this is really uncharted territory for me, which is fucking freaky. And I don't know if I really want to be on this boat, but I do know this. And this is the important thing. And I've been thinking about it for the last 6 weeks or so. And I know I keep saying, and I use this phrase within You're It Girl to always say, feel to heal. Feel to heal, to remind yourself of that it's okay to actually feel, even though lots of times we just want to suppress that emotion. What I do know now, after writing down those needs, which is why I asked you to write them down if you don't know what they are, is I know what I need now. And I know that it is not that. It is not the relationship that just ended. I know now that I have needs. I can communicate them. It might not go the way that I want, but it doesn't mean I can't communicate them. It doesn't mean I can't share them. I can actually go back and reference them, and I will embrace them, and I will stand by them because I know how important they are. And you can too. I also know this. And I think I said this at the beginning. I bet anybody in the future that's thinking about dating me is really worried that they might be on this podcast. So whoopsies. But maybe that will actually weed out the emotionally unavailable, non-committal avoidance that I seem to consistently have attracted in my entire life because of my previous inability to express needs and emotions. And so I'm going to be actively practicing this. And if this is something that you struggle with, think about what your needs actually are. What is important to you in a relationship? Write them down. Commit them to reference, to memory, and commit them for yourself. Tag, you're it. If you haven't done that task, your time is now. Write down your needs. Thank you for listening. That's You're It Girl.